All right, so now let's go to images. Now this is actually a fun area. Why? Because we all see, most of us, right? When we are seeing things, we tend to have pictorial representations, but we also have other senses, such as hearing. Right? So we actually also form auditory representations, or even verbal representations. Those are actually all considered images in this model, by the way. So, a lot of people in this area call it mental imagery. It's imagery that's occurring within the mind. And it can be visual, it can be auditory, it can be smelling, right? It can be olfactory, it can be touch. Those sorts of things. Those are images. So you want to remember they can be visual or non-visual. By the way, that makes a great midterm question. I suggest you write that down. I may put it on there.
How do you get from your home to FIU?
Yes, I'm going to ask you that on your midterm. Everyone would have to get 100 on that because I don't know the answer, except from my house. And no, I'm not going to ask you to find my house either, by the way. So, basically asking you what mental imagery is, and whether it's just pictorial or whether it involves some of these other things can be a great midterm question. And I may even ask you for an example. So, let's go through some examples. There are sensory images, taste and smell. Now, I love giving this lecture when I'm giving it during lunchtime because then people really appreciate it. I don't know if they'll quite appreciate it in the morning. Yes?
Touching is not a sensor.
Touching is a sensor. So if you look at, say, tactile images, which I will get to next, first I want to make you really hungry. So if we look at taste and smell, now, how many of you are meat eaters? Okay, apparently some of you. Okay, some of you will get this. I want you to imagine that you have just won a free steak dinner at the best steak restaurant in Miami. I want you to visualize what that steak, they just have brought it out, they've put it in front of you and you're smelling it. Is your mouth watering yet? No? You guys are doing it right. Come on. Now I want you to imagine that you go and you have your knife and your fork and you cut through it and it cuts through like butter. And you put it in your mouth and it just melts in your mouth. Oh, who wants a steak like that? Me, if it didn't get me sick. I know, doesn't. Oh, is your mouth watering yet? See how powerful our images are? Okay, are there any vegetarians? Okay, anyone who likes lobster? Okay, I do the same thing with lobster. Is there anyone who is there anyone who I did not catch something that you like? Want me to do the same thing with lobster? Or have I made you hungry enough? I don't know. Some of you are like, yeah, give me the lobster. It's real. So think about what you just went through with that. Unless you really want me to do the lobster, I'll do that too. That is actually an image. And you actually can have a physical reaction to it. Not unusual, actually. Then there are tactile images. That's feeling. So this is my favorite. What does a baby's skin feel like? One day I'm going to stick a picture of one of my kids up there. But think about like a bunny rabbit. How many of you have pet a bunny rabbit? Aren't they soft and furry and oh, so nice and cuddly? Now there are also motor images, and this is really interesting. So this is an imagery where we are actually visualizing doing something, such as slam dunking a basketball. Now sometimes students will say, okay, why are you bringing up basketball? How many people are going to be so interested in basketball? Well, I actually bring this up, other than I like playing basketball, so we must, of course, do things that I like. There are actually studies out there that have used imagery to help improve people's capabilities in sports. One of these studies was on basketball, where they had 3 groups of people. They had a control group that kind of sat around and enjoyed themselves doing whatever it is that they did. They had another group that actually was practicing slam dunking these basketballs, and a third group that all they had them do was visualize doing this. And in visualizing it, they had them see it and feel it. And they did pre-tests and post-tests, before and after tests, to see who improved. Now, what do you think happened to the ones who kind of sat around and did other things? Didn't they improve? No. What do you think happened to the ones who practiced, physically practiced? They improved. What about the ones who visualized? They also improved. Now, not as much as those who actually did the physical practice, but they actually were found to improve just using the visualization. So you actually see coaches that will also try to use that. So again, something that's very powerful for us as humans that we need to keep in mind when we are designing, especially later on when we talk about habits. Then there are emotional images. How did you feel when you won the lottery? Ooh, yeah. How would you feel if you did win the lottery? Woohoo! I can imagine that one. I don't think it'll happen, but I can imagine that one. So again, emotions, those sorts of things. Those are all images. Now, in talking about images, this is where it gets real fun. Images are great. They're very powerful. But they can also fool us. Very important for us to think about. So, vision for us is, pretty easy as humans. Not so easy for computers. But the way we see things is very different from the way computers see. We do not see them as extracting information from millions of pixels. We look at it more as a whole, more as the concept. So let's take a look at some optical illusions, because this is going to give you an idea, again, of how we tend to process visual information. So first we're going to look at the Necker cube. So this is a Necker cube. Now, I want you to look at it closely and answer a question for me. Where's the opening? Is the opening on the top or in the front? Both are correct. Let's look at the animation real quick. Hopefully, they will have Java working on here. Come on, mouse. Because one of the things you're going to find come on. Risk. Try this again. Oh wait, now where is it? Oh, it's the side, right? What about now? From the top. So it really depends on what else is going on in terms of how we interpret this information in our mind. And it's not like you're sitting there thinking, okay, he's coming from the top, therefore it must be from the top. You're processing it a lot faster than that. That's what we do as humans. Pretty cool, huh? Now, other things are also affected by how we view things, how we perceive things, such as color. We already talked about how color can mean different things in different cultures, right? Well, even within the same culture, there are various aspects of color that are important for us to keep in mind when it comes to design. So, we want to remember what we as humans are optimized for. So, our vision is optimized to detect contrast, which is edges, and not really so much on absolute brightness, as most people tend to think. And actually, this is there from birth. If you take newborns, and people have actually done this, you have a baby who's, an hour old or a day old, and you use eye tracking software to see where they look, you find that they look on the edges of things. such as when they look at the face, they look at the edges of the faces. They look at anything that's high contrast, the eyes, the mouth, on the outside of the face, those sorts of things. This is what we do naturally. So we are better at being able to make these types of distinctions. So when you translate this into color, because of course we use color in interfaces, it really does have an effect on how we now should present colors and what we use it for in our designs. So let's look at a few examples. And this, by the way, is from the Johnson book. Paleness. The less saturated two colors are, the harder it is to tell them apart. So if you're looking at paler colors, a pale blue and a pale pink, it's harder to tell them apart than a bright blue and a bright pink. You guys notice that? So in the Johnson book, when you look at these two examples, well, from afar, especially the paler you get, the harder it is going to be able to tell them apart. So here we have kind of a pale goldish yellow, and here we have a neon yellow. As it gets brighter, you think it's going to be easier to see them? Yes. As they get paler, it's going to be harder and harder. How many of you have gone into, say, Photoshop or a similar program where it has all of those little dots of color, the little squares, and you kind of are looking at two and you're like, I don't see the difference. Right? So you want to think about things like that in your designs. Color patch size. Smaller or thinner objects are harder to distinguish their colors, such as text. Sometimes you'll go to web pages where they'll have a dark blue text and a dark turquoise text because they want the dark turquoise text to be important. And people don't notice. Why? Because how thin does text tend to be? Pretty thin. So if you look at these examples, you'll find that these little itty-bitty squares, kind of just like in Photoshop and some of those programs, they're a lot harder to distinguish the colors between them than these two nice big patches. We need to remember that in our design. And then separation. The more separated color patches are, the more difficult it is to see their colors. So if you look at these two, right, there's nice white in between them. It's easier to distinguish their colors. Or, excuse me, it's harder to distinguish their colors than if you put them together, in which case it's easier. How many times have you gone into the store and you see a black pair of pants and a black shirt? They look the same until you put them together and now they're two different shades of black. I know, some of you may not notice. Like my husband, he doesn't notice. But they're both black. Yeah, no. So those sorts of things. Putting them together makes it easier to distinguish them than if they're separated. I want to show you some optical illusions that are going to really illustrate some of these. Okay, come on. Illusion 1. All right. Now I want you to look closely at this. This is a checkerboard. Notice there are two checkerboards, A and B. And so the question is, are they the same color or different colors?
Same.
Okay, what does it look like? It looks different. I know you guys are like jumping ahead of me. So here's our color swatch. Looks like A. And almost looks like B. Let me show you the other ones, which are even more obvious. All right. Now I want you to look at these two images and look at the square in the middle. Same color or different colors? What does it look like? They look like different colors. Let's take a look at our swatch. Same color? Oh, look at that. Same color. Pretty cool, huh? Let's toggle our mask. Now, does it look like the same color or different colors?
Same.
Now it looks like the same. Surrounded by other colors, and now it looks different. This is why it's sometimes so hard to paint your house, by the way. All right, what about this one? It looks different, but again, it is the same. There we go. So even though this one looks darker and this one looks lighter, they're still the same color. And again, if we toggle the mask, now we can see they are the same color. All right, what about this one? Let's look at the circles. What do you think? The same. But they look different. By this time, usually the entire class is saying, no, they're the same. You've tricked us enough. All right, so let's look at the swatch. Certainly matches all of them. So it looks very different. Even though it's the same, we put our mask on. Let's see if I can get this right. Now, do they look the same or different? The same. So, use of color in your designs can make a big difference. Let's take a look at some examples. We look at this nice graph. It's very pretty, bright colors, right? Unless you're colorblind. Here, it's very easy for most of the differences for us to see them. But when we're designing things, a lot of times we don't think about people who have limitations that we may not necessarily have. So let's take a look at the same graph if someone who's colorblind is looking at it. Now, how easy is it to distinguish? It really is much more difficult. And when it comes to color blindness, you actually want to also keep in mind that the most common colorblind combination is red and green, which to us looks extremely different. People who are colorblind, red and green look the same. Really, really important. So that's why you want to remember when we are making our designs, you don't want to just say, oh, I'm going to distinguish these things by color. You need to keep in mind, how is this going to work for people who don't have all of the same capabilities that we do? Now there's another page I'm going to show you really quick. This is where I've gotten a lot of your optical illusions. This is a very, very fun page, and it really illustrates a lot of how we perceive things. So I'm just going to choose, I don't know if you see something that you find particularly interesting. I'm just going to kind of randomly choose something. See, so here's the dimple. Remember the dimples? Yeah. Let's try the jumbled words. A lot of people have mentioned this. What does this say?
According to research at Cambridge University.
Wow, you guys are good. So yeah, so we can read it, right? Except if you actually look at the letters, what's with that? This goes back to concepts. When we are looking at words, once you have mastered reading in a language, you don't look at the individual letters anymore. That's why when you're writing papers, it's so easy to have typos. That's why you will have professors, and when you get out into the workforce, people will tell you, make sure you read things very carefully. And by the way, with autocorrect these days, it's even worse. Where it changes words all the time. I didn't realize that my tablet, it took me an entire semester to realize that my tablet was changing my last name from Davis to David. And so people they'd write me these really confused responses and be like, Ms. David? What's wrong with you? Oh, oops. Of course, it can also be a boom, because I always misspell there, and it always fixes it for me. But again, you need to be really careful. But this shows how we interpret things. It's on another page. Oh, there we go. I'm going to do one more. Is there anything that which one? Mask? Oh, the mask. So here's our mask. You guys see that? Pretty cool, huh? So this is basically our mind interpreting information, interpreting the world, so that we understand it better. What this is using is our experience and our knowledge of faces and the 3D world. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so I do recommend, I usually like looking at more of these, but we're running a little behind. I do recommend that you take a look at this page. It has a lot of really cool stuff. So, I did include a quick guide for using color. I've already mentioned some of these things. We'll talk more about this later in the semester also. You want to distinguish colors by saturation and brightness as well as hue, high contrast. You want to use very distinctive colors. Don't just use all shades of one color. You also want to avoid color pairs that colorblind people cannot distinguish, such as red and green. And importantly, use color redundantly with other cues. And separate strong opponent colors. So here are just two nice examples. We'll actually be looking at these examples more later in the semester. So, if we look at B, for example, how do you know where you are in terms of your process for creating a flight reservation? What do you see? Right, so there are a number of different clues. They use color, they use words, you're using colors that are high contrast from each other. It probably has a little tooltip on top of it, hopefully. So you definitely want to look at good designs to see what you should do, and look at bad designs to see what not to do. All right, then there, of course, is visual imagery, as we all think about it. And when it comes to imagery, again, you want to remember how we interpret things is very important. Tell me about this picture. What can you tell me about that?
It's a joyful situation. She's enjoying it.
It's a joyful situation.
It's the father and the sister of the baby.
That's probably the father and the sister of the baby. What else? Where do you think this picture was taken?
At the hospital.
Probably at the hospital. It's a newborn. Right? Have little newborn facial features. Anything else? I'm waiting for someone to say they're the cutest kids that have ever existed. Because guess whose kids they are? Yeah, notice who is not in the picture, because you know how we all look after going through such turmoil and having such adorable little ones come into the world. So, of course, the main reason for me asking you this is so I can show my children off. In all seriousness, though, I like to show an image and compare the information I get from you compared to the information a computer would get from this. So what information, if we gave this image to a computer and asked it to analyze it, what information do you think we would get? Yeah, at best they would say, okay, there might be 3 people. We possibly see 3 faces. What else? It might, if it has the appropriate information, be able to identify the difference between the hair and the bow. The difference between the hair and the face, right? That's high contrast. Would it be able to tell us that this was probably taken in a hospital? No. Would the computer be able to tell us this is probably a very joyful? Yeah, probably not. Or that, that this is a newborn.
With the proper facial recognition software.
Maybe if you have a full frontal view and it's a proper facial recognition software. Probably not at this angle, not yet. Those are using rules. Because when a computer looks at this, it's looking at the pixels. And then it's analyzing the difference between them. It's not looking at it as a whole like we do. It's not taking knowledge that we have that, oh, this is what it looks like typically when a picture is taken in a hospital with a newborn baby. A computer doesn't know that. And how would they figure it out? We as humans find it really easy. Not so much for computers. So, when you are designing your systems again, think about how we interpret information.